So we are going to see another topic there on page number 123, NCRT book, and this topic is employment in firms, factories, and offices. So I'm going to read from here. In the course of economic development of a country, labor flows from agriculture and other related activities to industry and services. So whenever we are going to talk about the economic development of a country, then we'll see here that labor is flowing from agriculture sector to other activities which are related to industry and service sector, that is the industrial and the tertiary sector. So in this process, so we can make this out that labor is flowing from agriculture to secondary and tertiary sectors, because already more number of people are engaged in agricultural activities in the primary sector. So therefore the excess of workers or labor is now shifting from agriculture to, or flowing from agriculture to secondary and tertiary sectors. In this process, workers migrate from rural to urban areas. So in during this process, when the workers are shifting from agriculture to secondary and tertiary sector, then this means that the workers are moving from or migrating from rural areas to the urban areas. Eventually, at a much later stage, the industrial sector begins to lose its share of total employment as the service sector enters a period of rapid expansion. So, in a course of time only, in the beginning, we saw that uh, more and more agricultural workers were moving into the industrial sector. But slowly, what happened that as the services started growing more and more, because as service sector uh, is that sector in which mostly necessary services are being demanded by the people, and therefore government is also trying or making efforts to provide more and more services to the people, like that of drinking water and uh, many of these type of services, okay, like education, health. So automatically the service sector started growing much more than the secondary sector, that is the industrial sector. And the same is written here, the service sector started expanding. And the shift can be understood by looking at the distribution of workers by industry. So let's see this shift of workers by the distribution of workers on the basis of industrial divisions. So how are we going to divide the industrial divisions? You can see here that all the type of economic activities are actually uh, divided into 8 different industrial divisions. So what are those 8 industrial divisions on which all the different type of economic activities are those which generate income, or when these activities are performed, then a person is going to earn money in that. So all these are divided into 8 industrial divisions. So the first one is agriculture, second one is mining and quarrying, third one is manufacturing, fourth one is electricity, gas and water supply, fifth one is construction, sixth is trade, seventh is transport and storage, and eighth one is services. So out of these all 8 industrial divisions, the first two, that is agriculture, mining and quarrying, these two come in the primary sector, these two activities. And on the other hand, manufacturing, electricity, gas and water supply, and construction, that is third, fourth and fifth activities, are going to be categorized into secondary sector activities. And lastly, the seventh and eighth activity, that is transport, as well as sixth activity, that is trade, transport, storage and services. They all come in the tertiary sector activities. So in this way, we can club these major, or we can say we can club these economic activities into major three sectors: primary, secondary and tertiary sectors. Now, if you see on page number 123, there is a table given 7.2, table 7.2. It shows the distribution of working persons in different industries during year 2011 to 12. So you can see this in your NCERT book. According to this table, what is shown here, let's see that table, and I'm going to explain it to you, that table. It is very important because the different tables are which are given in your NCERT book, they can directly come in your board exam. Primary sector is the main source of employment for majority of workers. So as we all know that this table 7.2, when you will look into your NCERT book, then you will see there that agriculture sector is that major sector which gives more employment to the workers, or maybe in another way we can say that majority of workers are engaged in the agricultural sector in India. And if you will see there that in the secondary and tertiary sector, how many people are working or engaged in secondary or tertiary sector, then in the, according to this table 7.2, secondary sector provides employment to only about 24% of the total workforce, and 27% of the workers are in the service sector. As I already told you that the service sector is starting expanding more than the industrial sector, and that is why the workers employed in the secondary sector were lesser than that of the service sector. So because service sector was expanding, and therefore 27% of the workforce is to be found in the service sector. Then according to the same table 7.2 table, near about 67% of the workforce in rural India depends on agriculture. So you can see here that such a big proportion of workforce is engaged in the primary sector activity, or we can say agriculture sector. About 16% of the one more thing is there with agriculture sector, forestry and mining, they are also involved in, which all comes in the primary sector. So 67% of the workforce is engaged in agriculture, forestry and mining. With this, 16% of the rural workers are working in manufacturing industry. So about 16% of the people in the rural India, as if on the basis of location, if we divide our area in India, then we divide it into rural area and the urban area. So about 16% of the rural workers are engaged in the industrial activities, that is secondary sector activities. On the other hand, service sector provides employment to only about 17% of rural workers. You will see here, we are just not talking about the rural area or rural India. So if you will see that very less percentage of workers, that is only 16% of the rural workers are engaged in secondary sector, whereas in the service sector, only about 17% of the rural workers are engaged. But on the other hand, you will see that agriculture is not a major source of employment in urban areas. If you will see that in the urban areas, more number of people are not engaged in the agriculture sector. Very less percentage of the people are engaged in the agricultural activities in the urban areas, and in the urban areas only more number of people are found to be engaged in the secondary sector, or after that service sector. But in the rural workforce, we will see very less percentage of people, that is 16% of rural workers in the secondary sector are found to be working, and only 70% in the found to be working in the service sector, because uh, the reason behind is this, that in the urban areas people are more educated, they are skilled, and in the secondary as well as tertiary sector more skilled and educated workers are required, like that of service sector in banking and these type of activities. Though both men and women workers are concentrated in the primary sector, women workers concentration is very high there. If you see, if we divide the workforce into two on the basis of gender, that is male and female, then we will see here that the women workers are more in number as compared to the men in the agricultural activities. So about 63% of the female workforce is employed in the primary sector, whereas less than half of the males work in that sector. You can see here that less than half of the males are working in the primary sector, but about 63% of the female workers workforce is engaged in the agricultural sector. Men get opportunities in both secondary and tertiary sectors, because uh, less than half of the men are engaged in the agriculture activity, because they are more engaged in the secondary as well as service sectors. After this, if you will see on page number 124, there is another topic given here: growth and changing structure of employment. So you can see here growth and changing structure of employment. So changing structure of employment here means what? Uh, Growth, as we are talking about the economic development only, and the structure of employment, it means number of people who are employed in any of the sector out of those three sectors: primary, secondary or tertiary. So let's read it out here. In chapter 2 and 3 you might have studied about the planning strategies in detail. Here we will look at two development indicators. So just now we are going to look at two development indicators: number 1, growth of employment, and number 2, GDP, gross domestic product. So whenever we are going to say growth of employment, it means the number of workers engaged in economic activities. Whereas whenever we are going to talk about gross domestic product, it means the total production, total product or output produced in primary, secondary and tertiary sectors. So let's compare between these two development indicators. 60 years of planned development have been aimed at expansion of the economy through increase in national output and employment. So since 60 years, planned development was going on. As we know that the planning commission started making 5-year plan. According to this, all the sectors in which India was weak, they wanted to our country wanted to get more development in those areas in which we were weak. So this planning commission started this 5-year planning system, and all this planning was aimed to expand the economy, okay, by increasing the national output and also the employment. So both the things were taken into account, that is national output should also be increasing, and as well as increase in the national output, the employment should also increase. Okay, so this was a type of say aim of planned development. During this period, 1950 to 2010, GDP of India grew positively. So from 1950 to 2010, GDP has grown in a positive manner, means production in primary, secondary and tertiary sector increased in a positive manner, and this increase in the production of primary, secondary and tertiary sector goods and services was more than means the increase in these in the production of these three sectors was more than that of the increase in employment. And However, there was always fluctuation in the growth of GDP. During this period, employment grew. So maybe there was a fluctuation in GDP from 1950 to 2010. Maybe it was growing at a much higher pace in different times, but on the other time, uh, at a lower pace, GDP was growing. So some fluctuations were found to be there in the GDP. But about employment, if we talk about, then during this period, 1950 to 2010, employment grew at a rate of not more than 2%. You can see this. Employment was not growing in a very good manner. So, according to chart 7.3 given in your NCRT book, so this chart 7.3 you can see on page number 126, it is given to you. According to this chart, you will see there, heading is given to you, trends in employment pattern. Trends in employment pattern. That is sector wise also and status wise also. So what do you mean by the sector wise? Sector wise means primary, secondary and tertiary sector. How many number of people were working in the three sectors. And status wise means that as we have already studied about status of employment previously, it meant self-employed workers. First status is there, second status is of casual workers, and third status was of regular salaried employees. So this status we have already studied about. So on the basis of this only, this table is going to show us the number of workers employed. So starting from this third paragraph, I'll read it from here. Chart 7.3 also points to another disheartening development. You can see here, according to this chart 7.3, there is some disheartening development. What do you mean by this disheartening? Because in the late 1990s, you will see there that employment growth started declining. Late 1990s, employment rate started declining down and reached up to the level of growth that India had in early stages of planning. You can see here that early stages of planning, where our government wanted that more employment should take place, but it was not taking place. So this late 1990s was the time period when this employment rate started declining, and we have been able to produce. If you will see there that this means there was a wide gap between the growth of GDP and employment. As we have already studied that from 1950 to 2010, GDP grew in a positive manner. Okay, but the employment rate was not very much in an increasing manner. So this has increased the gap between the increase in the GDP and the employment rate. So this widening of gap between employment and GDP meant that maybe production was increasing but employment was not increasing, and we have been able to produce more goods and services, and scholars refer to this phenomenon as jobless growth. So this phenomenon is termed as jobless growth, where it was to be found in the period of time 1950 to 2010. And this is jobless growth. Growth was taking place in the GDP. Production was increasing, but employment was not increasing. The reason behind is this, that maybe because more and more foreign companies were coming into India, or maybe our local indigenous industries of India were also trying to adopt more and more new technologies which were aimed at decreasing the labor in the companies and increasing the work of machines. So this was also the reason for the adoption of due to the adoption of new technologies. So far we have seen how employment has grown in comparison to GDP. Now it is necessary to know how the growth pattern of employment and GDP affected different sections of a workforce. So you can see in chart 7.3 that how employment was getting affected in different sections of workforce. So chart 7.3 second column, you will see there that self-employed workers, regular salaried employees, casual workers. What was the proportion of these workers? So according to this chart given on page number 126, from this we will also be able to understand what types of employment are generated in our country. So look at these two indicators that we have seen in the preceding sections: employment of people in various industries and their status. And we know that India is an agrarian nation. A major section of population lives in the rural areas and is dependent on agriculture. This we have already done till now. I have told you about that a major proportion of our Indian population is engaged in the agriculture sector. And development strategies in many countries, including India, have aimed at reducing the proportion of people depending on agriculture. So, whatever type of new strategies were planned by our government of India, this strategy was aimed at shifting the workforce from agriculture sector to secondary and tertiary sectors, because the proportion of people in the agriculture sector was very high. So the strategies which were made by our government of India, it was aimed to shift the workforce which was already in excess in the agriculture sector to shift to secondary and tertiary sectors. So distribution of workforce by industrial sector shows substantial shift from work from farm work to non-farm work. So you can see here, according to that table, chart 7.3, that people started shifting from farm work to non-farm work. Okay, farm work is that only which is related to the agriculture sector. But slowly, the workforce started shifting to secondary and tertiary sector. In 1972 to 73, about 74% of workforce was engaged in primary sector. You can see here that 1972 to 73, 74% of workforce was engaged in agriculture sector. And slowly till 2011 to 12, this workforce started declining. Okay, slowly means more and more people started shifting from agriculture sector to other two sectors. And according to this chart 7.3 given on page number 126, you will see there that in 2011 to 12, the agriculture sector workers has reduced to about 50%. Okay, and secondary and tertiary sectors are showing promising future for the Indian workforce. So promising future here means that more and more workers starting getting job in the service sector as well as industrial sector. So you may have noticed that these shares of the shares of these sectors have increased. So the share of secondary sector increased from 11% to 24%. Okay, the share means that how much production was increased in the secondary sector related to the total GDP. Okay, the total GDP means that total money value of all the goods and services produced in primary, secondary and tertiary sector. So how much proportion of the output was produced in the secondary sector has increased from 11 to 24%. This was a good increase. And similarly in the service sector, the proportion of total output increased from 15 to 27%. So this is also a good increase in the production in these two sectors. The distribution of workforce in different status indicates that over the last 4 decades. So on the basis of chart 7.3 on page 126, you will see that sector wise also distribution of workforce is given, primary, secondary and tertiary sector, and status wise also the distribution of workforce is there given. So according to the status wise, now we are going to do that. We will see that in the last 4 decades, one decade is of 10 years. So last 4 decades from 1972 to 2012. So in these 40 years, people have moved from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage work. This we can see continuously if we see the status wise distribution of workforce. If I will just read it out from here, from the table, you can see in your NCERT book there. that the wage workers or has increased. In 1972 there was 23.2% of casual wage workers, 1983 28.9%, 1993 31.8%, 2000 32.8%, and 2011 to 12 30%. Can you see here, the casual wage laborers were increasing in the coming years continuously. You can see this. So this means that more and more workers which were self-employed or regular salaried people, they started moving into the third status, which was called to be as casual wage laborers. So this shift of workforce from self-employed and regular salaried workers to casual wage workers is called to be as casualization of workforce. So this statement is important. It could be asked that what do you mean by casualization of workforce? You will write there that shifting of the workforce from self-employed and regular salaried workers to casual wage workers. So this casualization of workforce could be easily understood from the example given of a study of Ahmedabad. If you see on page number 129, you will see one block there in which it is written informalization in Ahmedabad. Informalization in Ahmedabad. So the word informalization here means there are two sectors, formal and informal sector. As we have already studied before also, formal and informal sector workers. The formal sector workers are getting much good wages or salaries as compared to the informal sector. So informal sector is that sector where the workers are not getting good benefits from their employers, and the workers are also not getting some security benefits in the informal sector as compared to the formal sector. So we'll talk about formal and informal sector just after understanding this paragraph of Ahmedabad. Okay, I just wanted to show you here that informalization means that the workers were losing all their security benefits when they were moving into informal sector. So let's talk about this Ahmedabad, what happened there. So in Ahmedabad there was it was a prosperous city, and in Ahmedabad large number of workers were found to be working in the textile mills. So near about 60 textile mills were there, and all these 60 textile mills were employing about 1,50,000 workers. Now all these workers were in a very good position because they were getting all the different security benefits. They were getting all those rights which a worker should get to work in some type of factory, firms, anyway. So here also the workers were forming their own trade unions, so that whenever these type of workers were exploited, they can ask for their rights to get good to get good salaries, good wages. So all was going fine. But what happened was that in the early 1980s, textile mills all over the country began to close down. The textile mills started to close down because these textile mills were very old, and they were not upgraded to new technology, and slowly these textile mills started closing down. And this procedure of closing down was very rapid in Mumbai, but there was a slow procedure of closing down of these mills. Gradually these mills started shut down in Ahmedabad, slowly. And what happened was all those workers, near about 80,000 permanent workers and about 50,000 non-permanent workers, they all lost their jobs and were driven into informal sector. You can see here that the formal sector workers started moving into informal sector, and this is what we call as informalization, or we can say that the workers from self-employed, from regular salaried jobs started moving into casual wage laborers. So this is what I was just now trying to tell you. After this, if you'll see on page number 127, you will see there one topic, another one. It is written here, informalization of Indian workforce. So let's see what do you mean by this informalization of Indian workforce. So on page number 127 of NCERT book, I am going to read from here. In the previous section, we have found that the proportion of casual laborers has been increasing, and one of the objective of development planning in India since independence has been to provide decent livelihood to its people. So our planning commission, or the plannings in India were made in such a manner, they were aimed in such a manner that the people should get decent livelihoods, and one of these objectives was just to give more and more employment. And if you'll see here that more and more casual laborers were increasing in India. It has been envisaged that the industrialization strategy would bring surplus workers from agriculture to industry. It was, you can say, it was found, or we can say, the strategy of Indian government was that if more and more development is going to take place, then the workers will automatically be going to be employed in the formal sector. Means whatever type of informal sector was there in our country, it will be slowly converting into formal sector. So if we see here, we have seen in preceding section that even after 55 years of planned development, more than half of the Indian workforce depends on farming as the major source of livelihood. So you can see here, after such a long planning development, still we find that about 55% of the people of our total workforce of India is engaged in agriculture sector. Economists argue that over the years the quality of employment has been deteriorating, and the quality of employment is also deteriorating. It is not getting better, but it is going down even after working for more than 10 to 20 years. Why do most of the workers are not getting maternity benefits, provident fund, gratuity, pension? Why most of the workers are not getting? And this was a big question in front of the development or planning commission. Why does a person working in the private sector get a lower salary as compared